Jason's backpack hit the ground with a sharp thud, but the pain squeezing his heart was far worse. Had he really just been expelled because he was poor and because of the color of his skin? The cold words of Principal Carter still echoed in Jason's mind, haunting him. This school is for decent families. There's no place for people like you. Trying to hold back the bitter tears, Jason dragged himself home, his heart heavy as he thought of the sad faces of his parents. But the very next morning, as the roar of a billionaire's helicopter thundered across the sky and suddenly landed in the schoolyard, both students and teachers froze in stunned disbelief. Jason Miller stood frozen in front of the principal's office, his palms sweating as he gripped his old, worn-out backpack. His heart raced wildly, as if it might break free from his chest. Every eye in the hallway at Westbridge Academy was focused on him, their gaze critical, tinged with curiosity, full of cold judgment. "Jason Miller," Principal Carter called out, his sharp voice echoing down the hall. Carter, a middle-aged white man with piercing green eyes and slick silver hair, looked at Jason with disdain, his expression completely devoid of any empathy. "Do you understand why I've called you here today?" Jason tried to stay calm, his voice trembling but still full of respect. "Sir, I don't understand. I've always followed the rules, never violated anything. I've also consistently been at the top of my class." Carter gave a cold, mocking smile, his eyes quickly scanning Jason's impoverished appearance, from his worn-out clothes to his faded second-hand sneakers. Then he lowered his voice, just loud enough for everyone to hear. "Jason, you know, Westbridge is a school for families of good standing, those with respect in society. This is not a place for someone like you." Carter's words clearly carried a much deeper meaning than just Jason's poverty. The students standing around began to whisper, a few snickers mixed with cruel mockery, their laughter dripping with unmasked contempt. Jason felt as though someone had just struck him with a powerful blow to his chest. His ears burned with shame and rage, the feeling so intense it nearly suffocated him. But he still tried to respond with all the dignity he had left. "I believe a school should judge students by their abilities and character, not by their family background or skin color, sir." Principal Carter furrowed his brow, his cold green eyes flashing with barely contained anger. "Don't get arrogant with me, Jason. I'll make this clear one last time. This school only accepts students from respectable backgrounds. A poor farm boy like you and—" Carter hesitated for a moment, but his eyes filled with malice as they lingered on Jason's dark skin. His voice turned icy, completely unfit to be a student here. "I'm forced to expel you, effective immediately." The cruel, racially charged words drained Jason of all his strength. Around him, the laughter grew louder, more venomous. Mason, the richest white kid in school, looked at Jason with open contempt. Mason spoke loudly, deliberately ensuring Jason could hear. "Finally, they've gotten rid of the black farm boy. Westbridge will be much cleaner and classier from tomorrow on." Jason trembled with fury, his fists clenched tightly, his nails digging into his palms, but he knew he wasn't allowed to retaliate, not allowed to show weakness in front of those who were demeaning him. Two white security guards stepped forward, each grabbing one of Jason's arms and roughly pulling him away, their faces full of scorn, as hundreds of students watched with derision. With each step Jason took, each burst of laughter pierced his ears like sharp knives, cutting deeply into his dignity. In that moment, a bitter thought flashed in Jason's mind. Was the color of his skin and his poverty the greatest sins he had ever committed in his life? Jason lowered his head and walked away, trying to hide the tears of anger and pain. But deep inside, a promise was written with unwavering determination and strength like never before. "I won't let people like Carter and Mason decide my worth. One day, they will regret what they've done today. Jason stepped out of the gates of Westbridge Academy, the harsh afternoon sun shining directly into his eyes, which were desperately trying to hide the tears. Behind him, the mocking laughter and gossip still echoed like an endless, cruel melody. It seemed the humiliation didn't stop when the principal's office door closed. It lingered, like invisible ghosts, following every step Jason took. Just as Jason was about to turn down the familiar path to escape the crowd's gaze, Mason's contemptuous voice suddenly cut through the air behind him, sharp and cruel like a cold blade. "Hey, Black Farm Boy, so you finally got kicked out of here, huh? You thought just studying hard would make you fit in here?" Jason froze, his fingers gripping his backpack so tightly they trembled. Mason moved closer, his expensive designer sneakers echoing confidently on the shiny tiles. Behind him was a group of his rich white friends, all of them arrogant, rich, and always considering themselves superior to others. Their faces bore an unmistakable air of pride. Mason leaned in closer, lowering his voice just enough for his friends to hear every word he said. "You should know your place and go back to your filthy farm. Westbridge isn't for people like you. Just looking at you makes this school lose all its class." Mason's friends immediately burst into laughter, some adding more cruel taunts. "Yeah, Mason, who would let a black farm boy into this place? He probably doesn't even know how to use the school bathroom. Look at his shoes and clothes. Bet he pulled them out of someone else's trash." Jason's heart tightened, his throat dry. He struggled to swallow the words he wanted to say because he knew any form of resistance would only please Mason and his friends more. But Jason's silence only fueled Mason's enthusiasm. He reached out and lightly pushed Jason's shoulder, his voice dripping with provocation. "What's wrong, Jason? Gone silent? Did I hit a nerve? Can't argue with me now." Jason turned his face away, trying to avoid Mason's mocking eyes, but Mason quickly stepped in front of him, blocking his path. His face was flushed with excitement, clearly enjoying the hurt he was causing. "Not only are you poor, but you're also too dumb, Jason. You should have known from the start people like you will never be welcome at Westbridge. Don't blame us. Blame yourself for being born a lowly black farm boy." The laughter grew louder, drowning Jason in shame and helplessness. For the first time in his life, Jason felt as though his efforts, achievements, and self-respect had been completely trampled upon, treated with such disregard as if they never existed. In desperate frustration, Jason looked up into Mason's cold, arrogant eyes, hoping to find some shred of humanity, but all he saw was contempt, alienation, and malice. Those eyes seemed to say that Jason didn't belong in this world, the world where Mason and his friends were born and raised in luxury. Jason took a deep breath, summoning every last bit of strength to keep his legs from trembling. He lowered his head and walked past Mason, trying to ignore the laughter and mockery ringing in his ears. But deep inside, Jason knew that the wound those sharp words had caused would remain forever in his soul, like an invisible scar, constantly reminding him of the cruelty of racism and social injustice. And in that moment of pain, Jason made a vow to himself: "I will rise from where I've fallen, and one day, Mason and people like him will have to bow their heads in shame for what they've done today." Jason walked like a shadow along the narrow, familiar dirt road, each step heavy in the dimming twilight. Mason's cruel words still haunted him, echoing relentlessly like a poisonous curse, making Jason feel as though his soul was being crushed bit by bit. The closer he got to the small house where his family was waiting for him, the slower his steps became, burdened by fear and the growing sense of shame in his heart. As soon as Jason stepped onto the porch, the door swung open. His mother, Mary Miller, a kind black woman with gentle eyes filled with concern, came out to greet him. She was taken aback when she saw his red-rimmed eyes. Then her voice softened with worry. "Jason, what's wrong? Why are you so late? Something happened at school, didn't it?" Jason didn't answer right away. He lowered his head in silence, trying to avoid his mother's gaze. At that moment, his father, Benjamin Miller, stepped out from the house, his face weary after a long day working in the fields. His sharp eyes quickly noticed something was wrong with his son. He moved closer and gently placed a hand on Jason's shoulder. "Son, what's going on? Please, tell us." Jason looked up at his parents, his throat tight. He didn't want to make them more upset, but the words of Principal Carter and Mason kept ringing in his mind, pushing him to the breaking point. Jason lowered his head, his voice breaking as he spoke in choked sobs. "I've been expelled, Mom and Dad. They said Westbridge isn't for people like me. They said a poor student, and a black one at that, would ruin the school's reputation." The air around them suddenly froze, time seeming to stand still. Jason saw his mother's eyes widen in shock and pain, her trembling hand moving to her mouth to stifle a quiet sob. His father stood motionless, his eyes heavy with bitterness, and his hand that had rested on Jason's shoulder instinctively tightening. "How could they do this to you?" his mother whispered, her voice breaking in tears. "You've tried so hard. How could they be so cruel?" His father remained silent for a long moment, his face weathered by years of hard labor, now showing signs of helplessness and despair. Finally, he spoke in a soft voice, but one full of bitterness. "We're sorry, Jason. We couldn't protect you from this unfairness and cruelty. Our lives have always been like this. People judge us by our skin color and background instead of our efforts and true worth." Jason looked up at his parents, his heart aching as he saw the disappointment in their eyes. The people who had always given him their love and hope, who had endured so much hardship to give him a chance to study at that prestigious school, were now suffering the sting of society's harsh prejudice. "Mom, Dad, I'm sorry." Jason choked, tears finally spilling uncontrollably. "I've disappointed you." Mary immediately stepped forward and wrapped her arms around her son, her tears flowing freely down her cheeks, mingling with a pain that words couldn't express. "No, son, you haven't disappointed us. It's those people out there, those full of prejudice and cruelty, who are wrong. You will always be our greatest pride, no matter what happens." Benjamin moved forward, pulling both of them into a tight embrace. His voice became more resolute, though it still carried an infinite sorrow. "Our family will always stand strong together, Jason. No matter how many times they try to put us down, we will always hold our heads high. I believe in you, son. I believe in you." In the warm embrace of his parents, Jason silently clenched his fist. He knew that the pain of today would be a wound that could never fully heal, but it would also become the driving force for him to rise above, to prove to everyone who had denied his true worth that they had made the greatest mistake of their lives. Outside, the sky slowly darkened, but inside the small Miller home, the flame of resilience and belief in justice had just been ignited. Jason knew that, though the battle against societal prejudice and racial discrimination would be hard, he would never be alone on that journey. Night fell quickly, darkness spreading over the vast fields surrounding the Miller family's small house. In the silence of the night, only familiar sounds lingered softly. The rustling leaves in the gentle breeze, the persistent chirping of insects like a sad melody, and Jason's quiet sighs lost deep in his vast thoughts. Jason lay still on his small bed, staring up at the ceiling, where the faint moonlight filtered through the tiny cracks in the roof. The events of the day replayed vividly in his mind, like a sad, black-and-white film that kept playing over and over. The insults from Mason, the contemptuous gaze of Principal Carter, and the cruel laughter from the other wealthy students, all felt like sharp knives cutting deep into his heart. Jason turned to his side, trying to close his eyes to push away the painful images, but the more he tried to forget, the more they seemed to appear, clearer than before. Somewhere in the small room, the clock ticked slowly, steadily, as if trying to remind him that time continued coldly moving forward, regardless of the emotional wounds stacking up inside him. In the heavy silence of the night, Jason bitterly asked himself a question he never thought he would have to ask. What did I do wrong to deserve this kind of discrimination and injustice? Truly, Jason had never chosen his skin, his circumstances, but why was society making him pay for things he couldn't control? Thinking about this, a vague sense of despair welled up in Jason's chest. He remembered the mornings he woke up before sunrise, working the fields with his father to help the family, then rushing to school in his worn-out clothes. Each day, he pushed himself to be better, hoping one day his efforts would be recognized. But all he received in return was disdain, discrimination, and brutal, open racism. Jason sat up abruptly, rubbing his face in frustration and helplessness. He glanced around the small room, his eyes resting on an old photo by his bed. It was a picture of his family from a summer afternoon years ago when Jason was much younger. Everyone's face reflected the simple, peaceful joy and happiness of that time. Holding the photo in his hands, Jason thought about the humble dreams his parents had for him. They had hoped that Jason would be the first in the family to receive a good education, to break free from the cycle of poverty and social injustice they had endured their entire lives. But now, all those dreams seemed to be crumbling right before Jason's eyes, not because of his lack of effort, but because of an invisible force called prejudice. He set the photo back on the table, the feeling of helplessness growing stronger as he thought about his parents, kind, gentle people who always did their best to give him a better future, but in the end couldn't protect him from the harshness of society. He walked over to the window, gently pulling aside the thin curtain, and looked out into the night. In the distance, the cornfield swayed lightly in the night breeze, the treetops swaying as if whispering to share in his sorrow. Jason rested his head against the cold window frame, whispering to himself in the darkness, "I wish there was someone, just one person, strong enough to stand up for me, for all the people like me. Someone who would dare to say that racism is wrong, that the worth of a person should never be judged by the color of their skin or their family background." Jason's wish echoed in the silence, but it was powerful and sincere, enough to make his chest ache. He didn't need a miracle, nor did he want pity. What Jason truly longed for was justice, a real justice strong enough to break down the barriers of prejudice so that people like Mason and Principal Carter would realize the cruelty of their mistakes. The more he thought, the more his desire for justice burned fiercely inside him. He suddenly remembered the stories his teachers had told about heroes who fought against injustice and racism, like Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and Nelson Mandela. These stories had always inspired him and given him hope, but right now, in the dim little room, they felt so distant, as if they were fairy tales that couldn't possibly happen in the harsh reality he lived in. Jason closed his eyes, wondering if, in this world, at this very moment, there was anyone brave enough, powerful enough to stand up for people like him. Who would be the one to bring hope to those trampled and abandoned by society because of cruel prejudices? Lost in these deep thoughts, Jason tiredly lay down on his bed. Outside, the stars continued to shine silently in the vast sky, as if witnessing the silent, heartfelt plea of a boy, a plea that at this moment no one could hear. What Jason didn't know was that in this moment of deepest despair, fate was quietly arranging a turning point, an event that, tomorrow, would change his life and the lives of all those who had ever looked down on him. And more than anything, it would open up a new path, a path where justice would no longer seem out of reach, but would become the reality Jason had longed for. The first rays of the morning sun pierced through the thin mist, and Jason lay still in bed, his dark, circled eyes wide open, staring blankly at the empty space before him. His sleep was restless and brief, interrupted by the haunting nightmares of the previous day. But just as Jason thought today would be another long, tiring day, an unfamiliar sound suddenly echoed from the direction of the town, growing louder and soon turning into a deafening roar that reverberated throughout the area. Jason sat up in surprise and confusion, rushing to the window. From the direction of Westbridge Academy, a massive, glossy black helicopter was descending onto the school grounds, witnessed by hundreds of stunned students and teachers. He rubbed his eyes once more to make sure he wasn't imagining things, but the sight before him was real. The helicopter landed, its enormous rotor blades creating strong gusts of wind that sent leaves flying and dust swirling like a small storm in the schoolyard. Jason held his breath, an odd feeling rising within him. What was going on? At that very moment on the school grounds, Principal Carter rushed out of his office, his face a mixture of anger and utter confusion. He waved his hand, shouting at the security guards, desperately signaling them to stop the strange helicopter that had landed without permission at his prestigious school. But the guards stood frozen, none daring to approach any closer, for they had already seen the prominent golden logo on the side of the helicopter, a bold, sharp K set against a mysterious black background, the unmistakable symbol of Kingston Enterprises. The helicopter door slowly opened. From within, a tall, elegant man stepped out, dressed in a luxurious black suit, his sharp blue eyes and confident demeanor exuding authority. It was Samuel Kingston, America's leading agricultural billionaire, a powerful figure known to all but rarely seen in public places like this small school. Principal Carter froze in the middle of the yard, his face shifting from anger to astonishment, and finally to visible unease as he recognized the man before him. Carter quickly regained his composure, stepping forward with a forced smile, trying to mask his discomfort. "Mr. Kingston, what a surprise to see you here. I wasn't notified about this visit." Samuel Kingston did not answer immediately. His piercing gaze quickly swept over Carter, a look that made the once arrogant, powerful principal feel small and insecure for the first time in his life. Kingston spoke in a deep, commanding voice, each word deliberate and strong. "I'm not here to meet you, Carter. I'm here because of a serious matter directly involving this school, something that demands my personal attention." Carter hesitated, trying to regain his authority. He responded stiffly and with clear suspicion. "I don't understand what you mean, Mr. Kingston. Westbridge Academy has always operated under the strictest standards." Kingston immediately cut him off, his voice steady but tinged with a controlled anger. "Strict standards? You call openly discriminating against and insulting a student because of their skin color and background strict standards?" Kingston's words made Carter's face turn pale. He stammered, desperately trying to hide the panic rising within him. I don't fully understand what you are implying." Kingston tilted his head slightly, his authoritative gaze locking onto the now shrinking principal, his voice lowered, but still loud enough for everyone around the school to hear. "Stop pretending, Carter. I've heard all about what you did to Jason Miller. A brilliant student expelled not for breaking the rules or poor performance, but simply because the boy is poor and black. Do you really think I'll let something like that happen right under my nose?" The entire crowd of students and teachers stood frozen in stunned silence. Mason, standing nearby, pale and shrinking behind his group of friends who usually praised him, felt the arrogance on his face evaporate. For the first time, fear replaced the smugness as he realized that his own cruel words and actions from the day before might have directly caused this shocking moment. Principal Carter tried to regain his composure, but his voice was visibly trembling. "Mr. Kingston, I assure you this is all a misunderstanding. If you'd like, we can discuss this privately in my office." Kingston interrupted him, his cold, unwavering gaze never leaving Carter. "No need for that, Carter. I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to make one thing very clear. No one in this school is allowed to discriminate, insult, or belittle others because of their skin color or circumstances. If Westbridge wants to survive, you will be held accountable for your actions." Kingston's words left the schoolyard in a terrifying silence. Carter stood frozen, unable to say a word. Never before had he been pushed into such a weak position. Never had he faced a pressure so immense and unyielding. Meanwhile, in the small house far from the school, Jason still stood by the window, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no idea that in just a few minutes his life would change completely, and the quiet plea he had whispered in the dark of night was about to be answered in the most powerful way possible. While the Westbridge schoolyard remained silent under the powerful and authoritative declaration of billionaire Samuel Kingston, Jason was still in shock inside the small Miller household, unable to comprehend the strange scene unfolding outside his window. He stood there, his heart pounding, his eyes fixed on the massive helicopter that had slowly lifted off from the schoolyard and was now heading into the distance. Jason couldn't understand why a powerful man like Kingston would appear at his old school, or what the harsh words he had just directed at Principal Carter meant. Had the prayer he silently whispered the night before actually come true? As Jason continued to contemplate, a loud noise grew steadily clearer from the field next to the house, causing him to turn around in surprise. Unbelievably, Jason watched as the very helicopter that had just left Westbridge was now landing on the empty plot right in front of the small Miller family home. Dust swirled up into the air, leaves blew about in the wind, and Jason rushed outside, his heart nearly leaping out of his chest. His parents quickly stepped onto the porch, their faces filled with alarm, their eyes a mix of worry and confusion. The neighbors, too, rushed out of their houses, wide-eyed in astonishment at the unprecedented spectacle. The helicopter gently touched down, its engine gradually slowing and coming to a stop. In the stunned silence of everyone present, Samuel Kingston stepped out, his imposing figure radiating authority, his black suit smooth and unwrinkled despite the dusty, short journey. Jason stood frozen, unable to move, his eyes wide as he watched the powerful man approach. Kingston stopped just a few steps away from the Miller family, nodding politely. Yet his sharp gaze held an unusual warmth as it landed on Jason's father, Benjamin Miller. "Benjamin," Kingston spoke, his voice strong yet filled with rare respect. "It's been a long time since we last met." Benjamin stood there, his face a mixture of shock and emotion, staring at Kingston as though he couldn't believe his eyes. His lips trembled as he spoke the first words, unsure and hesitant. "Sir, Mr. Kingston, is it really you? I never imagined I would meet you again like this." Kingston smiled softly, a stark contrast to the coldness he had shown to Principal Carter. "I've never forgotten the people who stood by me, especially those who helped me through the toughest times of my life." His words left everyone around him confused, exchanging looks of curiosity and astonishment. Jason and his mother were even more bewildered, as they had never heard of his father's relationship with this famous billionaire. Benjamin took a deep breath, trying to steady his voice, though his heart was racing. I didn't think the small things I did back then would be remembered by you for so long. Back then, you were young, just starting your career, struggling with so much, but I always believed you would succeed." Kingston moved closer, his gaze sincere and deep as he looked directly at the man before him. "Benjamin, what you did was not small at all. You didn't just help me keep the company afloat when it was on the brink of bankruptcy, but you also taught me the true value of a man, perseverance, loyalty, and compassion, no matter how difficult the circumstances." Jason stood there, stunned, listening intently. He had never known about his father's noble past or his connection to one of the richest and most powerful men in America. Kingston's words opened a whole new image of his father in Jason's mind, filling him with immense pride. "Mr. Kingston," Benjamin said, his voice still emotional but filled with respect, "our family is very grateful for your visit, but I suppose you didn't come just to reminisce about the past, did you?" Kingston turned his gaze to Jason, his eyes both stern and gentle, in a way that was hard to describe. "That's right. I'm here today because of Jason. Your son has suffered too much injustice. I will not allow that to continue." Jason's heart seemed to stop as his voice caught in his throat. He spoke for the first time since Kingston arrived. "Why are you doing this for me, Mr. Kingston? I'm just a poor, ordinary student." Kingston walked closer to Jason and placed a firm hand on his shoulder, his gaze full of sincerity. "Jason, you're not just an ordinary student. You are the son of the man who helped me overcome the greatest challenge of my life, and more importantly, you are a victim of the brutal social injustices that I will never tolerate. It is our responsibility to protect people like you, and not let prejudice and discrimination continue where justice should be upheld." The entire area fell into a deep silence as Kingston made this declaration. The neighbors around them were visibly moved, some wiping away tears at the heartfelt and powerful words spoken. Jason stood there, choked up and speechless. For the first time in his life, he realized that he was not alone in the fight against injustice. Kingston was the person he had longed to appear, someone with enough power and courage to stand up for justice. And in that moment, Jason understood that his life would change completely from this point forward, not just because of Kingston's protection, but because of the strong belief in justice and the true value of a person that had been awakened within him. Kingston's firm hand remained gently on Jason's shoulder, as if trying to impart a strength Jason had never known before. In that moment, all the noise and curiosity from the surrounding neighbors slowly faded into the deep blue sky behind them. Jason took a deep breath, for the first time in his life truly feeling that someone was really listening, standing by his side. Kingston's gaze was unwavering but kind. He spoke softly. "Jason, tell me everything you've been through. Don't leave anything out because I want to understand the truth, no matter how bitter it might be." Jason glanced at his parents for a brief moment. They nodded encouragingly, their eyes full of support. Finally, Jason gathered his courage and began to speak. His voice was shaky at first, but the more he spoke, the clearer it became, carrying with it all the suppressed pain that had built up inside him. "Mr. Kingston, from the very first day I stepped into Westbridge Academy, I knew I was different. I used to think that if I just studied hard and treated everyone kindly, I would be accepted. But that's not how it works. Kingston furrowed his brow, listening attentively to every word Jason said. Jason continued, his eyes lost in the distance, as though recalling everything that had happened. Even though I always got excellent grades, sometimes even at the top of my class, to Principal Carter and the wealthy students, that was never enough. Every day at school was a day I had to face cruel mockery. They called me names like Black Farm Boy, Country Bumpkin, and constantly told me I didn't belong in a school for people like them. Jason's voice faltered, but he kept going, trying to release all the pain he had silently endured for so long. But what hurt the most was Principal Carter's attitude. He didn't just ignore the insults, he openly showed his disdain and prejudice. Yesterday, he called me into his office in front of many students, and flat out told me that Westbridge Academy wasn't a place for someone like me. Upon hearing this, Kingston's face darkened, his sharp eyes flashing with uncontainable anger. But he held himself in check, allowing Jason to continue without interruption. Jason tried to remain calm, although tears began to stream down his face. He expelled me, not because I did anything wrong, but simply because of my skin color and because my family isn't wealthy. And the worst part is, right after that, Mason, the wealthiest and most powerful student in school, along with his group of friends, continued to publicly humiliate me, making me feel worthless, like I didn't belong. I tried to endure it all, but honestly, I can't understand how people can treat each other so cruelly just because of their skin color or their poor background. Jason paused, unable to continue due to the lump in his throat. The entire area fell into a deep silence. His parents stood by his side, their eyes red with pain, as if reliving those bitter moments. The neighbors around them also lowered their heads quietly, some wiping away tears that couldn't be held back as they listened to Jason's heartfelt and moving story. At that moment, Samuel Kingston stood still like a statue, his face tense, his eyes blazing with an uncontrollable spark of rage. After a long pause, he placed his hand on Jason's shoulder once again, this time squeezing gently as if to give him more strength. Then he spoke with determination. "Jason, what you've just told me is unbearable. It is an injustice and cruelty that no one should ever have to endure. I promise you I will not let this continue. Carter and people like Mason will be held accountable for their vicious actions." Kingston then turned to Jason's parents, his voice now both sincere and full of resolve. "Benjamin, Mary, I am truly sorry your family has had to endure this pain. I will not only ensure that Jason returns to school, but I will make them recognize and take responsibility for their mistakes. It's time for people like Carter to understand that this world has no place for discrimination and racism." Benjamin Miller, deeply moved, grasped Kingston's hand tightly, his voice shaking with gratitude. "I don't know what else to say, Mr. Kingston. Your presence here is already a miracle for my family. If you can help Jason get justice, it will be the greatest gift my family has ever received." Kingston smiled gently, but his eyes still burned with fierce determination. "Benjamin, you and your family deserve that justice. This isn't just Jason's fight, it's our fight. We won't let those who use prejudice to trample on human dignity go unchallenged." Jason stood there silently, listening to Kingston's powerful words, and for the first time in his life, a great hope sparked inside him, one he had never known before. For the first time, Jason believed that the injustice he had suffered would not be forgotten, but would be reclaimed with justice and righteousness. And at that moment, Jason knew that he was no longer alone. A great battle against racism and injustice had officially begun, and he was the one being protected, trusted, and most importantly, listened to. The moment Samuel Kingston's powerful promise echoed, Jason felt his heart ignite with a light like never before. A strong hope, something he once thought could never appear in his life, now became a reality in the most unexpected and spectacular way. Without wasting another moment, Kingston turned and motioned for Jason to join him on the helicopter. Under the astonished yet admiring gaze of his parents and neighbors, Jason walked with strong, confident steps toward the waiting helicopter. The wind from the large rotor blades hit his face, but this time Jason didn't feel overwhelmed or afraid. Instead, he felt clearly that he was standing before the most important moment of his life, a powerful return to claim justice. As the helicopter slowly rose into the sky, Jason glanced down below. His family's small home and the vast fields grew smaller, but the pain and discrimination he had endured became clearer than ever in his memory. Jason took a deep breath, feeling the certainty from the powerful man sitting beside him. Kingston said little, but the look of determination in his eyes spoke volumes. It was clear that this trip was not just a return to school. It was a turning point, a statement that a person's worth should never be judged by their skin color or background. Just minutes later, the helicopter reappeared in the sky above Westbridge Academy. Below, all the students and teachers stood packed in the schoolyard, gazing up with curiosity and shock. Principal Carter, standing among the crowd, looked visibly uneasy as he realized Kingston's return was happening far too quickly. The helicopter landed confidently in the schoolyard, its engines creating a gust of wind, blowing dust and leaves into the air, causing everyone to raise their hands to shield their eyes. When the helicopter doors opened, everyone held their breath, waiting. They had expected Kingston's return, but what shocked them even more was when Jason Miller, the student who had been expelled just the day before, stepped out beside the most powerful billionaire they knew. The schoolyard instantly fell silent, no one daring to speak. All the students and teachers stood frozen like statues, their eyes wide with disbelief at the scene unfolding before them. But the most frightened one in that moment was Mason. Standing among his rich friends who always praised him, Mason's face turned pale, his legs trembling as he witnessed Jason's powerful return. Standing next to Kingston, the man he and his father had always admired and feared. Jason held his head high, walking dignified alongside Kingston. He felt the eyes around him had completely changed. The looks that were once full of scorn and cruelty were now filled with astonishment, even apprehension. Kingston stopped in the middle of the schoolyard, his sharp gaze fixed on Principal Carter, who now had lost all of his previous confidence and arrogance. "Carter," Kingston spoke, his voice booming with authority. "I told you I wouldn't stand for injustice here. Jason Miller will return to this school today, and he will be treated with the respect and fairness he deserves." Carter swallowed hard, his voice trembling as he responded, "Mr. Kingston, this is truly a huge misunderstanding. I assure you." Kingston immediately interrupted him, his eyes cold as ice. "A misunderstanding? Are you telling me that racism and publicly discriminating against a student in front of everyone is a misunderstanding? I won't accept that cowardly explanation, Carter. If you can't maintain fairness and respect for the students, maybe Westbridge needs a new principal who can do this job properly." Kingston's powerful words echoed across the schoolyard, leaving all the students stunned. Mason, now with his head bowed, trembled in fear as he realized the serious consequences he and people like him were about to face. For the first time in his life, Mason understood that his cruel actions and hateful words were no longer something he could easily escape from. Kingston turned to Jason, his voice now gentle but filled with strength. "Jason, look them in the eye and understand that from now on, you never have to bow your head to anyone again. You have every right to be proud of yourself, because a person's worth is determined by their character and efforts, never by their skin color or background." Jason nodded, a surge of emotion rising in his chest. He looked directly into Principal Carter's eyes, then turned to Mason and the rich friends who had once insulted him. For the first time, he saw true fear in their eyes. That was the moment Jason knew that this return wasn't just about justice for him, but a powerful message to all those who had belittled, discriminated against, and trampled on others. And in that instant, in the middle of the Westbridge schoolyard, everyone understood that Jason Miller was no longer a boy they could look down on. This magnificent return firmly proved that justice always exists, and there will always be those strong enough to stand up for it. The moment Jason stood tall, full of pride, next to Samuel Kingston, the tension in the air at Westbridge Academy froze. The crowd of students and teachers remained completely silent, all eyes fixed on Principal Carter. Standing across from Kingston, Carter was no longer a man of power and arrogance. Instead, his face had turned pale, his trembling fingers revealing the fear he was trying to suppress. Kingston slowly took a few steps toward Principal Carter, his sharp gaze heavy with pressure, each step a declaration of the justice that was drawing near. When the distance between them had closed to just a few paces, Kingston stopped, looking directly into Carter's eyes, which were now helplessly avoiding his. "Carter," Kingston spoke, his voice not loud but filled with enough authority to send chills down the spine of anyone who heard it. "I hope you fully understand the gravity of your actions. You are the leader of this school, someone who should set an example for the hundreds of students here. But what you've shown is disgraceful and unacceptable." Carter tried to swallow, attempting to control his trembling voice, responding weakly. "Mr. Kingston, I assure you, I never meant to be racist. It was all a terrible misunderstanding." Kingston immediately raised his hand to silence him, his eyes flashing with anger that he could no longer conceal. "A misunderstanding? How much longer are you going to downplay this, Carter? An outstanding student was publicly humiliated, expelled from school simply because of his skin color and background. Are you really going to call that a misunderstanding? I think you know full well that your explanation is laughable and irresponsible." Kingston's voice was firm and unforgiving, each word clear and deliberate, causing Carter to lower his gaze. A look of helplessness etched across his face. The teachers and students around them also bowed their heads in silence, the sense of shame and guilt evident on the faces of those who had been indifferent or complicit in the prejudice Jason had suffered. Kingston continued, his voice now more resolute, carrying the determination of a man who had weathered many storms in life. "Let me make this clear to you, Carter. I will donate $10 million to Westbridge Academy, a donation unprecedented in the history of this school." Murmurs immediately spread through the crowd, everyone stunned, eyes wide with disbelief. Carter immediately lifted his head, his face shifting from anxiety to a tentative glimmer of hope. However, Kingston quickly pressed on. "But I will only make this donation under one single, absolutely clear condition. You must immediately restore Jason Miller's honor, reinstate him into this school today, and most importantly, you must issue a public, clear, and sincere apology in front of the entire student body, faculty, and community for your racist actions." Carter's face drained of color, his eyes wide with fear, his voice stumbling as he nearly could not find the words. "Mr. Kingston, I can't do that in front of everyone. That would ruin my reputation." Kingston's lips curled into a cold smile, his gaze colder than ever. Your reputation? Do you really think you still have any reputation left after everything you've done? Carter, I'm giving you exactly 5 minutes to make a decision. Either you meet the conditions I've set, or I'll withdraw the entire donation and go public with your racist actions to the press. At that point, not only will your reputation be gone, but so will your career. The entire courtyard of Westbridge fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Carter stood frozen, his eyes darting frantically between Kingston, Jason, and the students around him, their gazes filled with both reproach and disdain. In one corner of the yard, Mason shrank back, his face drained of color. He trembled as he realized that the privileged, powerful life he and his family had enjoyed could come crashing down in an instant because of what he and Carter had done to Jason. Carter panted. Time seemed to stretch painfully slow. Finally, when the pressure became unbearable, Carter spoke, his voice so small it was nearly inaudible. I accept Mr. Kingston's conditions. I will apologize and restore Jason's honor immediately. Kingston nodded coldly, his eyes piercing through Carter as if ensuring the man understood the consequences of his past actions. He then turned to Jason, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder, his voice warm and clear. Jason, now you will witness true justice. No one will ever be able to belittle your worth again. You will return to this school as a winner, with all the self-respect and pride you've rightfully earned. Jason nodded, tears of happiness and gratitude welling in his eyes. For the first time in his life, he felt a victory, not just for returning to school, but more importantly for winning back his honor and fairness. A victory deeper and more meaningful than anything he had ever experienced. And from that moment on, Jason knew that no one would ever look down on or discriminate against him again, for he now stood firm on the true value of who he was, a value that even those who had once looked down on him would be forced to acknowledge. As Principal Carter's reluctant agreement echoed in the air, the atmosphere at Westbridge Academy immediately became suffocatingly tense. Kingston stood firm, his sharp, cold gaze filled with authority and an unwavering determination. He didn't move an inch, just stared at Carter as if he wanted to pierce through the principal's weak and insincere promises. Carter swallowed hard, beads of cold sweat beginning to form on his forehead. His eyes were darting around, clearly searching for a way to shirk responsibility, or, at the very least, buy more time. His mind was a whirlwind. He'd never been in such an uncomfortable position before. The reputation he'd built over decades was now hanging by a fragile thread, suspended between Samuel Kingston's authority and the public apology he was about to be forced to give. Carter glanced at the crowd, who were all holding their breath, then forced out a strained smile, speaking in a weak voice. Mr. Kingston, I think we should discuss this in more detail in my office. Some matters aren't appropriate to discuss in front of the students. But Kingston immediately raised his hand to cut him off, his voice ringing clear and strong. Carter, I have no intention of discussing anything further in your office. The wrongs you've committed against Jason have already been made public, so your apology must be public and transparent, in front of everyone here. Kingston's words were sharp and unyielding, making Carter pale. His mouth opened, then shut again, clearly unsure of what to do next. In the meantime, Kingston took a step forward, fixing Carter with a stern look, then raised his wristwatch decisively. I've given you enough time to think, Carter. Now, I'll give you exactly 5 seconds to make your final decision. 1. You offer a clear apology and restore Jason's honor immediately. 2. You'll face the consequences I've just outlined. Kingston's declaration rang out sharply, and the entire schoolyard went dead silent. No one dared move, their breaths held in an anxious, suffocating suspense. Kingston began counting, his cold voice echoing through the absolute silence. 5. The first count made Carter panic, his eyes darting back and forth, desperately looking for an escape, but none came. 4. Carter trembled, his hands clenched into fists, his eyes cast down, searching for some last shred of dignity, but it was futile. 3. At this point, Carter realized there was no more escaping. His face went pale, his heart pounding so loudly it felt like it might burst from his chest. 2. Carter looked up, and for the first time, he saw the disappointed and contemptuous looks from the teachers, students, and even the staff, those who had always bowed to him in respect. Mason, standing at a distance, looked pale and completely still, too afraid to move. Carter realized that this was the consequence of the arrogance and cruelty he had thought would never be exposed. 1. Just as Kingston was about to finish the countdown, Carter finally couldn't bear the overwhelming pressure any longer. He panicked and, with a shaky voice full of fear, said, "Wait. I'll do as you ask. I'll apologize. I'll apologize to Jason immediately." Kingston lowered his watch, his gaze still stern, but his voice became a little calmer. "Then do it, Carter. Stand in front of everyone here and clearly explain why you owe Jason an apology. No hiding or distorting the truth." Carter shakily took a few steps forward, his body as if drained of strength. He took a deep breath and turned his gaze toward Jason, the student whom, just the day before, he had belittled, insulted, and expelled with the harshest words. "Jason, I truly apologize for what I've done. I was wrong to expel you from the school, not for any other reason than my own prejudice and racism. I was unfair to you, and I deeply regret that." Carter's trembling but clear words stunned everyone at Westbridge. Hundreds of students, teachers, staff, and even Mason were left speechless, unable to believe what they had just heard. Jason stood there, his heart pounding, but filled with pride. For the first time, he saw Principal Carter bow his head in apology before everyone, a thing Jason had never dared imagine would happen. Kingston stepped up to Jason, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder, his eyes soft but filled with pride and trust. "Jason, this is true justice. Remember, no one has the right to hurt or insult you again. From now on, you've fully regained your honor through your courage and integrity." In that moment, the courtyard of Westbridge Academy witnessed not only the downfall of Carter, but also the powerful resurgence of a young man who had overcome prejudice and injustice to stand firm in his true worth. Everyone present there realized that while truth and justice may be hidden, they can never be extinguished. And today, it was Jason Miller who brought that truth to light before all. The moment Carter's reluctant and bitter apology ended, the entire Westbridge campus froze in silence. The air thickened with a sense of tension and astonishment at the unprecedented scene. Principal Carter, who had once held absolute power, was now bowing his head in apology to a student he had so callously disrespected and trampled just the day before. Jason stood tall, silently witnessing the entire scene. He couldn't deny the swell of pride and a fierce sense of accomplishment rising within him, for justice had finally sided with him. But deep down, Jason could also sense the reluctance and dissatisfaction in every word Carter spoke. The principal was only saying these things due to the overwhelming pressure from the power and prestige of billionaire Samuel Kingston, not because he genuinely regretted or recognized his mistakes. Carter stood there, his cold eyes reluctantly turning toward Jason one final time, his voice flat and devoid of sincerity as he spoke. I hope you can forgive what has happened, Jason. From now on, Westbridge will accept you back, and I commit to ensuring that nothing like this will ever happen again." Though the words seemed kind, everyone could clearly feel the coldness and insincerity behind them. Kingston, too, noticed this, his eyes narrowing, his gaze piercing through Carter as if to say that he fully understood the true nature of the apology. Jason did not respond immediately. Instead, he calmly met Carter's gaze, his eyes steady and composed. There was no fear or hurt in them anymore, only inner strength and unwavering pride. Carter noticed this, and for the first time he felt a real sense of unease before a student he had once considered unworthy of his attention. Samuel Kingston stepped closer to Jason, gently placing a hand on his shoulder, and turned to face Carter, his powerful voice resonating through the entire campus once more. "I hope this will be the last time Westbridge Academy faces such an embarrassing incident. Don't make me come back here again, Carter. Do you understand what I mean?" Carter remained silent, nodding slightly, his eyes avoiding Kingston's. Deep down, he knew full well that, despite apologizing, he had never truly changed his views on Jason or students like him. However, he now had no choice but to accept his bitter defeat before Kingston's absolute power. A defeat he knew would leave a deep scar on both his career and his personal pride. Meanwhile, Mason, from the corner of the crowd, looked at the scene before him with genuine fear in his eyes. He realized that the days of freely insulting and discriminating against others without consequence had truly ended. For the first time in his life, Mason felt the fragility of the privilege he had once taken for granted, and he knew that from this day forward he would no longer be the untouchable one. Kingston turned to Jason, his gaze much softer as he spoke in a quiet but warm and sincere voice. "Jason, you've done something monumental today. You've proven that no one has the right to belittle or judge others based on their background or skin color. But I also want you to understand that while you've won today, the battle against racism and injustice will continue for a long time. It requires you to stay strong, brave, and steadfast, because people like Carter and Mason are still prevalent in this society." Jason looked at Kingston, feeling a mix of gratitude and determination. He knew what Kingston said was true. The fight against prejudice, discrimination, and injustice couldn't be won with just one victory. He took a deep breath and nodded firmly. "I understand, Mr. Kingston. I know what lies ahead, but I also know that no matter how long this fight lasts, I will never give up. I will continue to stand up, not just for myself, but for everyone who is suffering the same." Hearing Jason's strong and sincere words, Kingston smiled softly, his eyes filled with pride and hope. To him, Jason was no longer just a student he had protected, but a living embodiment of the values he had always believed in. Values of fairness, dignity, and courage. The tense atmosphere slowly dissipated as Jason took a step forward, turning to face the students and teachers standing before him. For the first time, his voice rang out clear, strong, and unshaken. "I want to thank everyone who has listened and witnessed what happened today. I don't seek revenge or foster hate. What I hope for most is that we can build a truly fair environment, where everyone is respected and judged based on their abilities and character, not their skin color or family background. I hope that from this moment on, we can create real change." Jason's words deeply moved the entire campus. One by one, students began to clap, starting with a few hesitant hands, and soon the entire courtyard was filled with applause. The sound echoed like a new vow for justice, tolerance, and the change everyone longed for. Though Jason knew the fight was far from over, in that very moment he understood that he had won not just against Carter, but against the injustice and prejudice that had weighed down his life for so long. And from that day forward, Jason walked with pride, ready to face any challenge ahead. As the emotional applause from the entire Westbridge Academy courtyard gradually faded, Samuel Kingston gently made his way toward Jason, his face radiating with evident pride. In that moment, Jason felt an unusual sense of closeness emanating from this powerful man. It was not just simple sympathy, but a deep trust in the future and potential of a young man whose fate had almost been crushed under the weight of prejudice and discrimination. Kingston gently placed a hand on Jason's shoulder, his voice warm and resonant, breaking the silence that enveloped the courtyard. "Jason, you have shown rare qualities and courage in the most difficult of circumstances, but your fight should not end here. I have a proposition for you, an opportunity I believe will allow you to fully realize your potential and continue contributing to a fairer and more equal future." Jason looked at Kingston intently, sensing the seriousness and sincerity in the powerful man's eyes. He asked, his voice curious yet still somewhat reserved, "Mr. Kingston, what is it?" Kingston smiled softly, pausing briefly to emphasize the importance of what he was about to say, then continued slowly, "I have just established a special scholarship program called Young Leaders for Justice. This program is designed to find and nurture outstanding young talents who have endured injustice and prejudice, but have the resilience and determination to change society. I want you to be the first recipient, Jason." Kingston's proposal was strong and clear, sending a wave of murmurs through the courtyard. Every eye was instantly fixed on Jason with a mix of astonishment and admiration. Even Carter, who stood there with his usual cold demeanor, could not hide his shock at the opportunity Jason had just received. Mason's face turned pale as he realized that the person he had once looked down on had now completely surpassed his control and imagination. However, Jason did not respond immediately. He lowered his head, remaining silent for a long time as if considering something very serious. A fierce inner conflict stirred within him. On one hand, he understood that this was a valuable opportunity, one that could open many doors for the future and allow him to make a real, widespread difference. On the other hand, Jason felt uneasy. He thought about Westbridge, about people like Carter and Mason, and felt there was still something he needed to prove here. Finally, Jason lifted his head and looked at Kingston, his gaze serious and sincere. "Mr. Kingston, I am truly grateful for this wonderful opportunity, but I feel that there is still something important left unfinished. I want to stay at Westbridge a little longer, to show people like Carter and Mason that a person's worth cannot be denied because of their skin color or background." Kingston listened attentively, not interrupting. His eyes shone with deep respect for Jason's maturity and remarkable courage. After a brief silence, he spoke gently, his tone full of understanding and compassion. "Jason, I fully understand your thoughts. I know how important it is for you to prove your worth to those who have looked down on you. But remember, the fight against prejudice is not confined to a single school or a few individuals. You can make an even bigger impact if you are willing to step into a larger arena." Jason looked at Kingston thoughtfully. The man's sincere words made him reassess the choice he was about to make. Indeed, he wanted to prove to Carter, Mason, and others at Westbridge how wrong their thinking and actions were. But was proving his worth just there enough? Should he expand his vision to create even deeper changes? It seemed that Kingston could read the thoughts running through Jason's mind. He gently continued, his voice warm and full of conviction. "You can stay here and prove what you want, Jason. That's entirely reasonable and understandable. But I believe that if you accept this program, you won't just prove something to a few individuals. You will inspire and empower thousands of others who are facing injustice and prejudice out there." Jason fell silent once more. His heart was deeply moved by Kingston's persuasive and inspiring words. He understood that this was a pivotal moment, a decision that would not only impact his own future, but could also have far-reaching significance for society. He looked up at Kingston, took a deep breath, and finally spoke clearly and resolutely. "Mr. Kingston, I would like to think carefully about this wonderful offer. I would love to join the program, but I also want to be sure that I am ready to take that path with a heart and mind fully prepared. I will give you my answer as soon as possible." Kingston smiled gently, his eyes full of pride at Jason's maturity and decisiveness. "I understand, Jason, and whatever you decide, remember that I always believe in you and support the path you've chosen." Jason nodded, his heart full of gratitude and determination. No matter what decision he made, he knew that he would never give up in the fight for justice and equality. From here on, he would move forward with all the strength and perseverance he had learned from the toughest challenges he had ever faced. As Jason walked through the gates of Westbridge Academy once again, his heart was heavy with thought. The meaningful offer from Samuel Kingston echoed in his mind, bringing with it a swirl of doubts, reflections, and a burning hope for a different future. On the familiar path back home, Jason walked slowly, each step seeming to struggle with the conflicting feelings inside him. Upon reaching the small home of the Miller family, he saw his parents waiting by the front porch. Their faces glowed with concern, mixed with deep pride. His father, Benjamin Miller, gently approached, placing his strong and experienced hand on his son's shoulder. His voice was warm and sincere as he spoke. "Jason, your mother and I know you've been struggling a lot, but I want you to remember something important. What you've gone through at Westbridge, the harsh words and prejudice, that will never define your worth. You have the right and the ability to go further, to rise above those who've belittled you." Jason looked at his father with deep emotion, his eyes slightly misted. His mother, Mary Miller, gently stepped forward, her gaze kind and warm as she spoke to him with all the love of a mother. "My son, I understand you want to prove something to those people. But sometimes the best way to show those who look down on you that they were wrong is to rise higher, to do great things they could never even imagine. That's the true victory." Jason was silent for a long time, looking up at the vast blue sky, reflecting on everything that had happened, from the painful insults of Carter and Mason to the moment Kingston had extended a hand offering him an opportunity he had never dared to dream of. His parents' words slowly sank into his mind, dispelling the lingering doubts. After a long pause, Jason took a deep breath, looking into the loving and hopeful eyes of his parents, and spoke firmly. "Dad, Mom, I understand your advice now. I'll accept Mr. Kingston's offer. I won't let prejudice and people like Carter or Mason hold me back anymore. I want to do more meaningful things with my life, not just to prove who I am to them, but to help others never have to endure what I've been through." Hearing these strong words, Jason's parents were overwhelmed with emotion, unable to speak. Benjamin pulled Jason into a tight embrace, his voice trembling with emotion. "I've always been proud of you, Jason, and today I'm prouder than ever. You've truly grown up." Mary embraced both her husband and son, tears gently rolling down her cheeks. But this time they were tears of joy, pride, and a deep hope for the future that lay ahead for her son. The very next morning, the sleek helicopter bearing the symbol of Kingston Enterprises once again appeared in the sky over Westbridge, gently landing in the open space in front of the Miller family's small home. This time, Jason approached the helicopter with a completely different posture, his back straight, his head held high, and his eyes full of pride. Outside, neighbors stood in a large crowd, all gazing at Jason with admiration mixed with a hint of envy. A few of Jason's true friends waved and cheered for him, their faces bright with pride and emotion at this pivotal moment. Further away, Mason and a few other students, those who had once cruelly insulted Jason, stood silently, scowling, their faces filled with discomfort and jealousy. They realized that from this moment forward, Jason had truly surpassed their control and disdain. They knew that from now on, they would never be able to stand taller than Jason again. Samuel Kingston stood beside the helicopter, looking at Jason with satisfaction and pride. He nodded gently, his warm voice resonating once again to encourage him. "Jason, the road ahead won't be easy, but I know you can do it. From today, you represent not only yourself, but also countless others waiting for change. I believe in you." Jason turned back, hugging his parents one last time, feeling their immense love. Then, with steady steps, he walked onto the helicopter, leaving behind the painful days, the heavy prejudices, and the people who had tried to tear him down. The helicopter door closed, the blades began to spin loudly, dust flying up. But the proud and trusting gaze of his parents was clearer than ever. They stood there, waving goodbye to their son, their hearts filled with joy and hope for the future Jason was about to create. Jason looked down at the familiar landscape one last time from above. He felt a fresh and powerful energy fill him, as if all the struggles and challenges he had gone through were mere stepping stones that would allow him to rise higher, further. In that moment, Jason silently promised himself that he would never stop fighting for justice, equality, and compassion. And on this flight toward a new future, he knew his life had truly changed. A change not only for himself, but for many others still waiting for a glimmer of hope, just as he had once waited. As the helicopter slowly landed on the rooftop of the towering Kingston Enterprises headquarters, Jason could feel his heart pounding in his chest. The city sprawled below, with busy streets filled with traffic and towering buildings packed close together, unfolding a completely new world. A world that just days ago, Jason never dared to think he would belong to. The helicopter door swung open, and a powerful gust of wind rushed into the cabin, causing Jason to squint. Samuel Kingston stepped out first, turning back with a reassuring smile and gesturing for Jason to follow. Jason stood up, took a deep breath, and then took his first step onto the rooftop, officially beginning a journey full of promise but also many challenges ahead. Kingston Enterprises was not just a symbol of wealth and power, but also a place filled with grand ideas about social justice, anti-discrimination projects, and development plans aimed at creating a better society. Jason knew very well that stepping into this building meant he was standing in front of an opportunity to truly make a difference on a much larger scale than Westbridge ever could. Samuel Kingston led Jason down a vast hallway with transparent glass walls, allowing a panoramic view of the entire city. Finally, they stopped in a spacious office where natural light poured in through floor-to-ceiling windows. Kingston gently sat down, signaling for Jason to sit as well. He observed Jason for a long moment with a thoughtful gaze, then spoke in a sincere and serious tone. "Jason, I'm sure you're wondering why I chose you, aren't you?" Jason nodded slightly, his eyes full of curiosity but also seriousness. Kingston smiled gently, then slowly continued the conversation. "Many years ago, when I was a young man full of passion but also frustration, I too suffered the bitter sting of racism and discrimination. I grew up in poverty, looked down upon by society, mocked by the wealthy and powerful, treated as invisible just because of my skin color and circumstances." Jason's eyes widened in surprise at these words. He had never imagined that someone as powerful and successful as Kingston could have had a past so similar to his own. Kingston continued, his gaze becoming distant, as if looking at a very clear old memory. I understand the hurt you've been through because I went through the same thing. I had to fight, work twice, 3 times harder than others, just to be treated equally and fairly. And I promised myself that when I had enough power and strength, I would use them to protect and create opportunities for young people like I was. That's why I chose you, Jason, because I see myself in you. Jason stood still, his heart moved deeply by this heartfelt confession. In that moment, he understood more than ever the mission that had just been entrusted to him. This wasn't just an opportunity to change his own life, but also a great responsibility to bring justice to others, those who silently endure the injustice and prejudice out there. Kingston stood up, walked over to Jason, and placed a firm hand on his shoulder. From now on, you will learn from the best leaders, you will understand more about business, social responsibility, and how to effectively fight injustice. But above all, Jason, you will become a living symbol of the fight against racism and social prejudice. Are you ready to carry that responsibility? Jason looked up at Kingston, his eyes shining with an unwavering determination. I'm ready, Mr. Kingston. I promise I won't disappoint you. Kingston smiled with satisfaction and trust. He knew choosing Jason was the right decision, not only because of his ability and intelligence, but also because of the young man's strong heart and rare courage. After that, Kingston left Jason alone on the rooftop, giving him a moment of solitude to think about the future ahead. Standing atop the tallest building in the city, Jason walked closer to the glass edge, his eyes set on the vast horizon stretching endlessly before him. From this height, the city with all its people, stories, prejudices, and injustices seemed like a small scene, reduced to the scope of his view. But Jason understood that beneath that seemingly small exterior were millions of people, each one possibly facing challenges, prejudice just like he once had to endure. He took a deep breath, silently telling himself he would never forget what he had been through, the wounds caused by prejudice and injustice. But from this moment on, Jason knew he was no longer a victim. Instead, he would become a leader, a powerful voice for all those who are oppressed and discriminated against. With that resolve, Jason straightened his back, his eyes focused on the distant horizon, vowing to dedicate his life to fighting for justice, equality, and tolerance. He knew the road ahead would be full of obstacles and challenges, but Jason was ready to continue forward, becoming a powerful symbol, inspiring others to rise up against the injustice and racism that still exists in society. Jason's journey of struggle and triumph serves as an inspiring reminder that no matter who you are, where you come from, or what the color of your skin is, the true value of a person is defined by their resilience, courage, and never-give-up spirit. Prejudice and injustice can hurt you, but if you believe in yourself and keep pushing forward, one day you will stand on top and make those who once looked down on you take a hard look at themselves. Have you ever faced injustice or prejudice in your life? What would you do if you were in Jason's shoes? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. If you enjoyed this meaningful story, don't forget to like and share this video to spread the positive message to more people. And make sure to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next heartwarming stories. Thank you, and see you in the next video.